DOH or DEM, and we tried to track as closely as possible to those requirements outlined at the state level, current and as amended. And some of the reporting of if there's a chemical leak, if you are storing certain chemicals on property or on site, you have to go through reporting requirements already. And so if there is a leak of a substantial nature, the DEM should be notified regardless of that. And those processes at the state level are going to override. Where we found in talking to people from DEM and other areas was it really came down to what does the town want for planning purposes? What does the town feel comfortable putting over those classifications of water? And does the town want to allow certain land uses? And that's really kind of where we felt the need for the special use. We didn't want to fully restrict it, and we felt that the special use was a good opportunity, like certain other communities in the state, where you're allowing it, but just with a set of guardrails, if you deem that it's appropriate and allowed. And so that's kind of where we came from it. In terms of the fines and stuff like that, we didn't really change any of those. Those are already outlined in other ordinances, so if those need to be updated or revised, that's probably a different discussion for a different day. And in terms of the enforcement, that was the other area where the committee realized that could potentially create a pressure on the current administrative staff. And so ideally, the committee had discussed that at some point there may need to be discussion in the town of hiring an additional zoning enforcement officer, either part-time or contract or whatever that structure looks like, just to help out, because the town knows that staff is limited, right? There's only maybe one or two people, and their bandwidth is limited as well. And so that those discussions did happen, but obviously we have it from a different level.
Do we have any questions from the Board of Commissioners?
Please.
Do you have any questions from the
No.
Board of Second?
You all around, sitting over there.
I do have a question. Mark, at the present time, do any commercial industrial establishments have to submit MSDS sheets to the fire department? Material safety data sheets?
I'm not versed on that, so I really don't know.
I believe it's mandatory, and they should have, we should have full knowledge of who has what on sites. But that fire department paperwork, which maybe
At every one of our locations on Industrial Highway, as soon as you walk in the building, the fire marshal comes by every year, we go through what's in the building, we redo everyone, we leave them right at the door. So when there's a fire, they have a copy at the station, but also they're at the door when the firefighters come.
do they come and ask you for an update once a year?
We have to update it with them once a year and with the sewer committee from Woonsocket. They have a spill thing that comes in every year. It goes through all of our buildings, goes over our spill procedures and what we have to do. So we're audited once a year.
Okay,
Anything else?
I'm all set.
Yeah. So what's next step with this, Mr. Curlow?
We have to
I
make-
think the next step is to see if there'll be any comments from the public.
Okay. So as we open the public hearing, thank you.
It's not really a public hearing, it's a public meeting, but if the public's here and they wanted to speak, I think it would be good to have some input.
Anyone who wishes to get up and speak, there's the podium, just introduce yourselves.
Gary Zofsky, 88 North Main Street. I want to start by saying that my time here tonight is only as a resident. I represent no one. I have no interest in any activity where this ordinance has impact. But my comments are based on experience of having spent 4 years as the administrator, 2 years as a member of the Sewer Commission, 5 years as a member of this panel, and a few on the former Water Authority, all of which taught me quite a bit about North Smithfield, needless to say. Beyond that, I am a registered professional engineer and have been a Massachusetts licensed site professional and a Connecticut licensed environmental professional. with experience in managing close to 100 groundwater remediation projects in New England, including 4 gasoline and 3 fuel oil sites here in North Smithfield alone. Among my Rhode Island-based projects are sites often referred to as the most serious the state has seen. I've been qualified by both courts and local zoning boards to offer expert testimony in groundwater assessment, migration, and remediation. With all of that, I think I hold a rather unique understanding of North Smithfield, both above and below ground. With my role on the former water authority, perhaps the most enlightening. We as the water authority actually went out and looked for future locations for water supply for the town. We spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I hope there are records that you folks have seen, possibly, certainly the planner has seen, because they are beneficial and meaningful. I'll repeat a comment that I made in prior discussion of this ordinance back in 2006, I think it was, when it was first considered in the aftermath of Dowling Village, because that's what this is. There are extensive, as already been mentioned, there are extensive federal and state laws already in place today to protect our environment. Trying to be a manager of those rules, I don't believe is wise for the town of North Smithfield. I'll get to points later. Alternative compounds and processes have been developed to preclude the use of the chlorinated solvent problems that originated in town 50 or 60 years ago. And for those who will point to PFAS at the high school, I suggest this ordinance doesn't give us ability to miraculously see the problems that may be seen in the future. We don't have those abilities, nor does anyone else on the planet. This is a complex area that our town does not have the resources to manage. It is my view that what we have done to date is a reaction to proposed development that is really only NIMBYism. That's all this is. Even the local news folks, I think, have properly characterized this process as having its roots in the MST expansion proposal. So we're really here tonight as a continuation of the aftermath of Dowling Village, when there were forecasts of terrible impact to the Woonsocket Reservoir and a giant conga line of traffic all the way up to 146, all the way up 146 into Union Village. Doc probably remembers some of that. Of course, none of that has happened. In volunteer work beyond North Smithfield, I focused on making regulations clear, predictable, and reliable, CPR. For more than a decade, I've chaired the Small Business Economic Summit Regulations Subcommittee. For 5 years, I was the Rhode Island delegate to the National Small Business Regulatory Fairness Board in Washington. In all that work, I haven't been an enemy of regulation. Clear, predictable, and reliable has always been the target. One result of that work that is important to cite here, because of the nature of what we're looking at, was the first rewrite in 40 years of the Rhode Island wetland regulations that took effect last year. I was afforded opportunity to speak at the signing event for that legislation and referred to as the father of the law by former Rhode Island DEM Director Janet Coit. I believe in environmental protection. I actually practiced it for 20 years. In many cases, the new rules, the wetland rules, expanded the setbacks for wetland based upon science that was respected by regulators and developers, with the expectation that the ultimate permitting process would be more clear, predictable, and reliable. In that case, we're not so unique, or as in that case, we're not so unique that we need to establish our own special rules. With all that said, I could go through the ordinance line by line to offer concerns, but I won't. I'll stay more global with 3 main points. First, there's been conversation about how this map got modified in 2020. It was pretty simple. While I was the TA, I pointed out to our planner that we had ongoing chlorinated solvent spills that essentially bookended the same industrial park that had been broad brushed into the overlay district by the original ordinance. Ignoring those facts is really a critical aspect of what needs to be talked about here. It was my opinion then, and remains so today, that even if it was possible to place a high-capacity well, because that's what this ordinance focuses on, high-capacity wells. It would be, even if it was possible to place a high-capacity well in or near our industrial park, I don't believe it is, and I don't believe it is, the Rhode Island Department of Health will not allow that installation, given the conditions in and around that area. So what we're doing is elevating the hoops that business has to go through to be able to locate or operate in the town, to no sensible benefit. The very idea that the expert that the review board has relied upon could offer that industrial sites can be capped, that blew my mind when I heard that comment, as a means to allow water use in this area is just amazing to me. Let's look at what we have. If you've got the map, I mean, find the Amprex site, which is now National Market, on that map. That was a chlorinated solvent release that's been well documented. My opinion, that would be a Superfund site by every criteria, except for the fact that there's a responsible business entity paying the bill, continuing to pay the bill to clean it up. And they know they're going to be there for a long time. Stamina is another chlorinated solvents release. Find that on your map. It's essentially the other end of the same business park that would be included if this map is to be reverted back to its original configuration. There's home locations that were forced to close wells, and in a few cases on Providence Pike, Blackline Road, Tift Road, there was supplied public water. Locate that area. There's just a few. There's a half a dozen houses, I believe, in that area, the juncture of those three streets. Of course, we have the area off Maple Avenue, where wells have been closed to prevent people from pumping water out of concern for moving chlorinated solvents. And I don't know if anyone realizes that there was a well at Hallowell that was shut down long before the school was closed. We know why? Any guesses? The Stamina site. I recommended to the Slatersville Water Company at that time, I forgot what year it was, it must have been like 2002, 2003, but given the activities at Stamina Mill by EPA, our continuing to pump the 75 gallons a minute or so that we were pumping from the Hallowell well was a risk to the water system. That depending on the hydraulic conditions, if we wound up in a time where we created, not intentionally, but by chance, created a lower hydraulic head in that Hallowell pumping location, we could pull the chlorinated solvents out of the rock and into the water system. It was my advice to the town that shut down the use of the Hallowell production well. And was that a high volume well? It's not a high volume well. I mean, 75 gallons a minute for a public water system is not a high volume well. I don't know if people understand what this means. We're looking, what makes you think that a high volume well could be planted into the middle of this series of circumstances? It won't happen, folks. And in the meantime, what we're going to do is have our hands around the necks of businesses that are not a problem to our community and impeding the possibility for future use by others. For example, the Branch Village Park, that we've got 100 acres available. How long has it been available? I don't see people lining up to come in. And what we're looking to do is raise the bar on what they would need to do to be in. And put them into, I call it a circumstance where we've got a series of hurdles that will move based on who's in your seats and what kind of fear people have, as opposed to understanding of groundwater movement and groundwater conditions. It's easy to be afraid. It's difficult to manage sensibly. You know, I started to ask, does everyone understand what a high volume well is? And maybe even before that, you know, I've heard comments made about the aquifer. Like there's one big lake below us. That's not the case, folks. What we really have below us is essentially a series of pools that are bounded by rock. To the point that one pool doesn't hit the other pool. They're bounded. The areas that are identified on this map are based upon soil formations that are expected to be deep. They're described that way. And from which you could install a gravel-packed well, not the bedrock wells that many of us have at our homes, but gravel-packed wells, like the one we have on Tiff Road that's out of service, and we're not doing anything with, which is mind-boggling to me at this point in time, is based on some other things that have happened in town. And they're built in the sand. They're not in the rock. The hole is augered, and then a wire-wound screen is installed in the well with different forms of pumps placed inside that screen to pump water. The Tiff Road well at one time pumped 600 gallons a minute. That's a high volume well. We, within the different pools that exist in North Smithfield, if you will, the subsurface pools, we have the ability to draw, according to USGS back in the 50s, and affirmed by consultants that work for us at the Water Authority, that we have the ability to pump up to 5 million gallons a day, every day, forever. We've never tapped it. You know why? The Water Authority was seeking that. People didn't want to pump it because they were fearful that we were going to pull stuff out of LR&R. And I can understand the fear, but that's the point, is that we can't live with fear. We have to live with sensible management. The Tiff Road well pumped for 50 years or more without a single hit of the compounds present at LR&R. Go back and look at the records. They're there. It's because of the bedrock divisions that isolate these pools. That's what the kind of well that we're talking about, and the kind of well that we need for our future well supply, not just for ourselves, but for the region. We should be looking to try to develop it, not taking the excuse that you can't. But, you know, it's really been founded. You know, back in the early 2000s, we had groups of people that forced the disbandment or the abandonment of the Water Authority. In premise that, no, we don't want to pump that water. Now we're putting these rules in effect to protect the water. Well, which is it going to be? Do we want to use it? Or do we want to use scare tactics to tell people that we can't use the water? We need to make up our mind as a community which one it's going to be. It can be some of both. There are reasons to protect. We need to do it sensibly, not with this broad brush. So, the anthrax and stamina problems stem from releases of chlorinated solvents. Forecasts by experts for time to complete solvent-related releases in bedrock are often expressed not in years, but generations. Such being the case, prior to the 2020 change, we were imposing special criteria for operation on local businesses that had no history of releases. They became non-conforming pre-existing conditions. From 2006 to 2020, they were subject to regulations to be interpreted by very few who would actually have skill to understand the issues. That condition will return if this recommendation is adopted in full. Second, the proposal before you attempts to rectify some of the senseless elements of the existing ordinance, which, for example, states hair salons and car washes are not allowed in the overlay district. That's what we operated on for a long time. In addition to my work in remediation, my firm also did many hundreds of site assessments of property to help prevent buyers from falling into liability for a soil and groundwater problem. I couldn't recall a circumstance where a car wash, absent a fueling facility, had ever, or any hair salon, had ever been identified as a problem. I tested that further by a few weeks back contacting Rhode Island DEM Director Gray, who, after asking senior staff at DEM, replied by saying they also had no such recall. So, did we prevent, over the past 20 years, 17 years, did we prevent a hair salon from going in, or a car wash and save the town, or our groundwater resources? I don't know. But I have to ask, are we in fear of and trying to regulate things that don't exist? Finally, I'll advocate again now, as I did in 2006 and before the review committee, the optimal way to manage chemical risks in our community is through rules that already exist. In particular, we have the existing time-tested provisions of the regulation referred to as SARA Title III. That is the Superfund Amendments and Reauthorization Act, and an element that created EPRA, or the Emergency Planning and